Well, when I think about bones, it makes me think about bone mineral density. Honestly, I just can't help it. It's definitely something that I think has just been beaten into my head ever since I was a college student about, oh, 26 years ago, 27 years ago, long time ago. But I remember learning so much about the importance of bone mineral density and also learning about the structure and function of bones, which clearly is very important. But I was very fascinated by what happens to our bones when we don't put external resistance on it and the loss of bone mineral density and how devastating that could be to our bone health and overall health for that. So we will dive into that. But any discussion about bones has to start with what's the function of bones. So bones have a variety of support mechanisms and function mechanisms. One is support. It serves as a structural framework for the body and supporting soft tissues, providing attachment points, and being the lever for movement and assisting movement for muscles. The other part is protection, right? Protects a lot of your internal organs from injury. For instance, you have your rib cage, which protects your vital organs, the heart, lungs, cranial bones, protect the brain, or else we'd just be anything that hits in the head, we have a big problem with there. So we have that it helps us. There's also mineral homeostasis, so helping us storing several different types of minerals, calcium, phosphorus. This also contributes to bone strength. Can be released in the blood to be distributed to other tissues in the body and maintain mineral balance. We also have blood cell production. Certain bones, a connective tissue called the red bone marrow, produces red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. The process going hemopoiesis is for that as well. And then also triglyceride storage is a big part of it as well when we look into that. But the bones of our skeletal system have an incredible network system of cartilage, ligaments, forming a framework here. And osteology is actually the study of bone for that. And cartilage is the forerunner of most bones and covers many joint surfaces, and ligaments hold bones and joints together, hold bones together at joints for that. So a lot going on, just discussing like what's actually happening with this first. So let's continue to move on. So a little bit of bone cytology, right? So bone is a living, breathing thing. So essentially, it is always creating new bone, depositing old bone. So in the process of osteoblast, think blast building, okay, is always building cells for new bone. Okay, so as we're sitting here right now, over the course of time, we are making new bone, we're depositing new bone. We're making new bone, we're depositing new bone. So osteoblast is the process of building new bone. Osteoclast, thinking crash, is the process of basically depositing new bone. So osteoblast, build, class, crash for that. Okay. So in the osteoblast process, we're synthesizing, secreting collagen fibers and components needed to build bone, the components of bone. And this also initiates calcification as well, or in the process of calcification means that hardening of bone tissue is a big part of that as well. This ossification or osteogenesis in the process of bone formation happens in four principal situations. Okay, this is how it occurs. So, initiation of bone formation happens as an embryo and a fetus. So, the initial start of building bone is when you are at that portion of your life inside your mother, and growth of bones during infancy, childhood, and adolescence are part of this process too. So I'm going to come back to this in a second, but after I finish this, and then we have a remodeling of bone. This is the replacement of old bone with new bone throughout the course of your life, and then we have repair fractures and things that happen when we break bones. So one of the really important aspects of this is thinking about when we are having growth of bones during infancy, childhood, adolescence. Essentially, kind of from age 10 to 20-ish is a really important period because this is where we gain the lion's share of our bone mineral density. How do you increase bone mineral density? Primarily through external resistance, through resistance training or force that's greater than you're used to. Now, we know that during this time period, this is essentially our big loading phase. So as we're growing, this is a great opportunity during this time frame to build bone and to strengthen it, to harden it, become as a protective mechanism and as powerful as possible. Doesn't mean we can't improve bone mineral density after this age group, but it is certainly much harder to do that. And certainly as people age and get older into their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you're going to have to provide a much larger stimulus, and it just gets harder as the body is not processing and creating bone the way it used to for that. So it's critically important that you start the process of external resistance training younger in life. Now, there used to be a big issue of if you were providing resistance training to younger children in that age range, like 10, and that it would stunt their growth. This is a myth. In fact, we know under supervised resistance training and with good coaching that children can gain a robust skeletal system and really increase that ossification process where bone mineral density is really growing. Now, the opposite here is when you don't provide any external resistance through resistance training or force that's greater than what you're used to on your body, you over time, especially as you become elderly, you start losing bone mineral density pretty quickly throughout the decades. Think about this also, and I like to learn about bones, especially, and this is also about my background, is learning about bones in space. It's really amazing. So when you're in space, you do not, because of the lack of gravity, you're not basically anchored to the ground anymore. And the body is an incredible machine because what it does, it says, hey, if we're not using this, we don't need it. It's extremely efficient, right? Humans do weird things. We keep things around we don't need all the time, and we justify those things. But, our body actually is incredibly efficient and doesn't look at life that way. Our body says, hey, we're not getting the stimulus that we need here for the demand. We don't need it. We're not putting any resistance onto our muscular system. We don't need muscles. We don't need to increase the size of our muscles. We're not putting the stimulus onto our bones. We don't need to strengthen our bones. So in somewhere like space where there's zero gravity environment, bone mineral density starts to literally flush out of your body. And what we know from long-term astronaut like up to a year when astronauts are in space, that they can regain previous fitness levels over time, generally speaking, but bone mineral density can sometimes not come back to its fully formed function. So this is something that's really important. And so I always urge people as a fitness professional, as an educator, is that we always talk about the pathology of systems. We should talk about how we need to thrive in these systems. And for bone health to thrive, we need to have external resistance placed on it at a young age so that we can have as much of that system built up to help with what happens over time, which is kind of a decline in systems. And we try to mitigate that with continued resistance training throughout the course of life. So 4 principal situations: initial formation of bones, an embryo and fetus, growth of bones as an infant and as in childhood, adolescence, remodeling of bone, which is the osteoblast, osteoclast that occurs throughout the course of your life, then also repair of fractures, which happens when bone is damaged or injured as well in that situation. Okay, so let's keep moving along here. So when we look at bone and osseous tissue, this is a connective tissue. It's hardened by calcium phosphate and other minerals. And we talked about mineralization and calcification and the hardening process of bones. So individual bones consist of bone tissue, bone marrow, cartilage, adipose tissue, nervous tissue, and fiber connective tissue as well. Fibrous. Ugh, my words, geez. Also here, we have different types of bones, so general features of bones. So we have flat bones. So think of like thin curved plates. These are ones that kind of protect your soft organs. Think of parietal bones, skull, sternum, scapula, ribs, hip bones. We have long bones. These are longer than wide bones. These are more of like your rigid levers. So these are acted upon by movement. Think about your femur. All right, so down on your legs, think about your radius, ulna, the humerus for that. Okay, so the phalanges, metatarsals, these are what are the action movers. Flat bones are more the protectors for that. Some bones don't fit those categories. You may have some short bones, right? These are approximately equal in length and width. You're looking at like bones of the wrist and ankle for this. You also have irregular bones, which are elaborate shapes. Think about your vertebrae and some skull bones as well are part of this. So types of bones generally would be like your flat bones, long bones, short bones, irregular, sesamoid bones. Just think about, so the different types of bones. Anatomy of long bones, you're looking at compact versus spongy bones. So a compact have like your dense outer shell, which is encloses the marrow or medullary cavity. Spongy bones are more loosely organized bone tissue. These are found at like the center of the ends and the center of shafts of long bones. Okay, so we're looking at kind of the anatomy of it. So if you're looking at a picture of bone, you could see kind of, let's say for instance, looking at the femur, you look at the top of that, like the articular cartilage. You have the spongy bone right in the middle there, the epiphyseal line, periosteum, compact bone, medullary cavity, and then you also have the proximal epiphysis, so proximal being closest to the origin. You have the diaphysis and then the distal epiphysis, distal being further away for that there. So if you look at this, the diaphysis is really like the shaft, right, that provides the leverage. The epiphysis, the enlarged end of a long bone, is part of that as well when we look into that there. All right, so there are many other things we can talk about with bones, and bones can get pretty granular here as we get deeper into the inner workings of bone. But the purpose of this presentation is to provide you with a really high-level view of the bones and for you to take it further from that. I believe learning is best done when you learn a little bit from someone else, and then you also start learning a little bit for yourself as well. But hitting the high points and discussing about bones, the anatomy of bones, how bone is formed, remodeling, 4 principles of that. This is the stuff you really need to know, the functions of bones, all that, and how it works in your body. I would say, and going back to that bone mineral density discussion, this is something that makes bones, to me, always come more alive. When we're talking about the actual process of how do we strengthen and thrive in this system. And all of my presentations, there's always an aspect of that. And you won't hear me talking too much about the pathological aspects of that because, honestly, that's what's always discussed. But what's rarely ever discussed is how we thrive in these systems. And for bone tissue and our bone-based system, our skeletal system, movement is key. I look at it also as physics, in that bones are the lever system, that physics. So when I use a longer bone, so for instance, my femur or my humerus here, when I do that, I'm actually producing more force with that. And I need more force if I'm going to push something or pull something, right? So I'm going to have to do that to overcome the mass of an object. So bones are not just about bones, they're about physics as well. They're about biomechanics and those things of that nature. And I think exercise physiology is a great platform for learning a lot about bones. And so always remember that. Make sure that resistance training is a big part of your program because it provides the platform for improving bone mineral density. Bone mineral density best done younger in life. Now, for those of you thinking, I didn't weightlift or do resistance training when I was younger, I'm starting later. Again, doesn't mean it's not something that's going to be beneficial for you, but obviously it's best done when it's younger, and you can still make tremendous gains with bone mineral density when you're older. But again, like anything, those gains are not going to be as great as if they were started younger in life. But what's important is that we keep our bones healthy. We promote the stimulation of improved bone mineral density because we know that as we age, these things change over time. And being sedentary is actually one of the worst things we can do for bone health because it just continues the process of decreasing bone mineral density over time. And I talked about space. Obviously, you're not in space, but here on land, you can have a very similar effect. It just happens at a slower pace. So you really want to make sure, and I want to drive home the point that external resistance, a force that you're not used to gradually over a period of time, is only going to help you to have better bone remodeling, better bone tissue, better bone mineral density. And overall, what does that equal? That equals a much better quality of life. Because what happens is when we starting to have pathological issues related to bone health, we start to lose our functionality, which means we start losing our independence. So this is why these systems are incredible working together. So bone health affects muscular health and vice versa. All these things start affecting other bodily systems as well, such as respiratory system, endocrine system, urinary system. It all works together in this beautiful interplay to help you be you, but to help you be the best version of you.